Hello, this is Teens Talk Politics, and we're back again for another weekly news episode. Today, I'm joined again by my co host Sam, and today's Thursday, and this will be released
Mhm,
on Friday. Anyways, we're going to start off with big news that only happened, I believe, 2 nights ago from the time of recording, and this was the
mhm,
California recall. I'm going to say right now, the polls were very off. It was supposed to be very close, come in to about 10 percentage points. That's not what happened. It was more like 30 percentage points.
mhm,
If I get the actual numbers up, the no for the California recall, no meaning Governor Newsom should not be recalled and stay in the governorship. He received 6 million votes, 6,086,555 votes, and that was 63.8%. Only 77% have been reporting at this time. And then for yes, it was 3,450 or 454,924, which is also 36.2% of the votes. So significantly less. And the polls were very off, but turnout was very high with 9.5 million people coming out to vote on an off year. Not only not being a midterm or a presidential year, it was a year that they don't normally have elections held
mhm.
statewide in California. And I thought it was very interesting to see how Gavin Newsom was able to hold a grasp on the governorship. I think it was pretty clear he was going to win on election
Mhm.
night. I think Larry Elder, the main frontrunner, that was the Republican candidate, had he been recalled, was he basically knew he was going to lose, and it was quite clear. But like I said, I did not expect it to go where Gavin Newsom is receiving 63.8%. That outdoes his margin in 2018, where he only received a little over 61%.
Mhm.
So the fact that the margin is this high, I think, really speaks volumes towards the Democratic Party. Yes, this is California. And yes, had Republicans won in the state of California, one of the most liberal states in the country, yes, there are more liberal states in New England. However, on the West Coast, yes, California is the most liberal state out of all of them, having the biggest margins for Joe Biden on the West Coast. Had Republicans won here, I would probably say Democrats are doomed for the midterms. However, I think this is very good for something like this, where the Republicans are trying to take advantage of people being desperate for getting out of COVID measures and blaming it on Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, and the American people, at least Californians, saying, no, that's not what happened. Republicans are taking advantage of the situation.
Mhm.
Yes, Republicans have about 1 and 2 disadvantage, with 2 out of 3 people being Democrats, registered Democrats, out of the people that are not registered independents or unaffiliated, with 2 out of 3 of them being Democrats and only 1 out of 3 being Republicans. So they did have that massive disadvantage
And
there.
proportion
However, the fact that the margin didn't really move at
and
all since 2020 with Biden's numbers, I think that's pretty impressive for the Democrat Party,
and proportionally it works out.
especially looking at the county results, where you have places like Orange County that used to be a stronghold for Republicans back in the Reagan era, now going to Gavin Newsom by like 4 percentage points, which Biden won it by a larger margin, but that was pretty close. And I think going into the midterms, Democrats know that their strong grassroots supporters, like Democrats in California, will stick with them. Back in 2010, the last massive red wave year after the
Mhm.
2008 elections, with President Obama winning in a landslide and Democrats taking a filibuster proof majority in the Senate and having a massive margin in the House, many grassroots Democrat supporters voted for Republicans
Yep.
to have a Democrat White House and then a Republican House. They did not flip the Senate that year, however, they did 4 years later.
So it
And I
shouldn't
think,
it shouldn't come as too much of a shock, but it's interesting to see how off it all was. I mean, especially with the, the history of California, as you were saying.
right, and there's a lot of strong Democrats voters in a lot of other states that are going to be up in 2022 for the Senate. Places like Colorado, we have a
Mhm.
lot of strong Democrat voters in that state. And the only reason Republicans would be able to flip that Senate seat is if
Mhm.
Democrats, registered Democrats, along with a massive portion of independents in that state voted for the Republican candidate. then Michael Bennet would be out in Colorado. And I think it reassures Democrats that, okay, our main Democrat supporters that have supported us throughout the last decade are going to stick with us. And this basically is a massive reassurance to those
Yeah.
politicians that are worried about the reelection in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of these battleground states where the Democrat supporters or the Republican supporters cannot get them over that 50% threshold and win an election where they have to rely on independents voting their way, doesn't mean much. Yes, this is
Mm-hmm.
California. Was it ever going to a Republican? No. But had it done it, I think it would speak volumes. It would be tremendous, really, for the Democrat Party to lose a governor race in California.
Yeah.
And there's not much to say otherwise because of it's California.
Yeah.
No Republicans won here in years. It got kind of close in 2010, but besides that, it hasn't really been close.
No.
2003 is the last time there was a recall. That went to a Republican. However, California's changed over the years, and so has the political landscape. There were many Democrats in California, not as much as today. But there were more Democrats than Republicans. However, he won in a
Mm-hmm.
landslide. The
And in some
Republican
ways, you can
candidate won in
see
a
the
landslide.
socioeconomic effects on this because, especially as the rich become a lot more of a minority than they were, say, 30 years ago, then especially California, known obviously as having the second largest city and being the first in population, having these a lot of typically rich people living in California makes it more of a minority, especially for Republicans. But you can see the demographics starting to change um, as more rich people move to California and all that stuff, and it gets increasingly harder for people to live and stuff like that. So it makes sense why we're seeing these demographics change as they are, just because of how the times are changing, especially with the socioeconomic difference.
Yeah. And besides what I've said before, California is a Democrat state and it will maintain its Democrat status for a long time. So,
Mm-hmm.
what it really means for later on in the next 2 years for Democrats in future elections doesn't say very much, except that Democrat supporters are going to stay with Democrats, at least in this
Yeah.
portion of the country, which should give you a view of what's going to happen in other places.
Yeah.
And with Gavin Newsom winning, he's going to be able to fill out his term and he'll be up again in 2022. And he will probably run again for another term. We don't know for sure, but it's most likely that will happen. But unless Sam, do you have any lasting thoughts? Because there's really not much to say.
No. Yeah. California will be California
Right. Yes, there's a big
for
part
this
of
for the time being, anyway.
there's a big part of California that's very rural, but for the most part, it's just urban. You have Las Vegas, sorry, not Las Vegas, Los Angeles, sorry, San Francisco, San Jose, San
San
Diego,
San Diego. Mm-hmm.
Sacramento. So you have these massive places, and that's what really carries
Yeah.
California. And most of the time, that is the case in many states where it's the city. Washington, it's Seattle. New York, it's New York, right? Massachusetts is Boston. So you have these massive cities that carry the Democrat states. And I think we're going to move on to what happened on the memorial service in 9/11. We did have a 9/11 special, however, that was recorded the day before. So what happened on the day of 9/11, 2021, we weren't able to cover. However,
And it's a bit more disrespectful to get political, especially during such a massive loss of life.
right, but people do have different ways of going about dealing with a crisis, regardless of
Mm-hmm.
your political party. But most of the time, it does match up. Republicans want to do it one way, Democrats want to do the other, Independents want to do it this other way. But we're going to be talking about what Trump decided to do on 9/11, and I think I won't use the word disgraceful because some people might disagree with me. However,
Mm-hmm.
what Trump did wasn't really commemorating what people did and what firefighters did and the loss of life that was 9/11. He came out in New York. He shook firefighters' hands. But most of the time, he was just blathering. Is that the right word? Just going on
Labyrinth.
with his mouth and talking about how the election was fraudulent. And he didn't do much
Among other
commemorating
things.
of firefighters and the loss of life on 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, he went down to commentate on a boxing match. On the day that thousands of people lost their life, he chose to commemorate it in air quotes by commentating on a boxing match. Once again, talking about this big election lie that he won the election, which he did not. Every other president,
Mm-hmm.
with the exception of Jimmy Carter, went to one of the ceremonies, whether it be in Arlington, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York. There were presidents there. Bill Clinton, one
Mm-hmm.
former president, he was in New York. Barack Obama, another former president, he was in New York. George
And
Bush
obviously Jimmy
was in
Carter.
Pennsylvania.
Jimmy Carter didn't go because of his
He's like
health.
90 something, yeah. And then
Mm-hmm.
Biden went to all three, both Pennsylvania, Pentagon, and then the Twin Towers.
Mm-hmm.
But Trump chose not to go to those. He chose to go and commentate on a boxing match. Can we talk about how insane that is?
Mm-hmm.
What other former president has chosen to go to a sports event and commentate on that instead of going to the 9/11 memorial services? Had
Mm-hmm.
Obama done the same thing, Fox News would be all over him for the next month about this. Fox News does not care that Trump chose to do this. One American News does not care that Trump chose to do this. Newsmax does not care that Trump chose to do this because they think it's not relevant, because when someone does something stupid and they agree with you, you choose to ignore it. And that's what these news networks are doing.
Mm-hmm.
Commentating on a boxing match, that is insane. On 9/11.
It's disappointing. It's disappointing how no one really called him out for this. I mean, CNN obviously reported on it, and among other news sources, but no one really called him out for it. It's unfortunate that they have to, that he has to work around like that. The way the political landscape works, especially, it's just so vicious to some people, um, and it's just unfortunate
Yeah.
that
And
no one can really realize.
right.
And that
And
that no one can really realize how serious of a disgrace that is. It really is, of how big of a disgrace this could be. Uh-oh. You there?
okay, and now we're going to move on to what a former president, George Bush, said in his speech while they were in Pennsylvania. While Trump was
Mm-hmm.
commentating on a box match, Joe Biden was there because he did go around the country, to starting in New York and going around like that. George Bush made a speech. I think it made sense because, yes, he was the president on 9/11 2001. So it made sense that he made a speech.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was just a beautiful speech. Regardless of your political party, you needed to agree that that was a well done speech. It was kind of short, which was nice because you don't have to read too much, because we were just reading over the transcript of the speech. I think it's very interesting when he's talking about domestic terrorists, because these domestic terrorists
Mm-hmm.
were on the Capitol bombing. Sorry, not Capitol bombing. The Capitol attack on January 6th, and he basically poked at how they were very dangerous, just as international terrorists. And I thought it was quite humorous to see George Bush talking about domestic terrorists, especially poking at what happened in the Capitol,
Mm-hmm.
especially related to Trump supporters, who were the domestic terrorists that attacked the Capitol, killing 7 people on January 6th.
Mm-hmm.
And we mentioned this in 9/11. It's hard to compare when several thousand people died versus an event where only 7 people died.
Yeah, well, I'd like to also to mention the results would still be the same if both attacks succeeded in their goal of taking over the United States. If there's this very popular show on Netflix at the moment called Designated Survivor, where a worst case scenario like this could have happened. where very few Congress people would live in an attack against the Capitol. And so that would mean an easily government immobility slash takeover. And it would also mean during a domestic terrorist threat that the domestic terrorists on January 6th were attempting to take over the entire Capitol. And if they were maybe a bit better prepared, they could have actually succeeded in their goal.
Have you even watched the show?
I have not, but I've
Oh
heard
my.
good things about
Then
it.
what are you talking about?
Hmm?
Well, the prospect of the
It's
show
similar.
is the
A similar thing would occur.
basically what happened in the show, which I would say is very similar to real life. Is the cabinet member that was the designated survivor became the president.
Hmm.
Only two Congress members survived. One was the designated survivor for Congress, and the other one survived because they were in a bunker in the Capitol. However, that's getting off topic, but yes, George Bush did mention Donald Trump, not by
Hmm.
name, but he did. Uh, you can infer that's what he was talking about when he was mentioning domestic terrorists. And Sam, what do you think about what George Bush said on Saturday?
Yeah, and I mean it's good that he's nodding. He's nodding, especially because Bush has been seen in the eyes as a very good president among all types of conservatives, um, which is arguable. But so Bush has been not a bad president for conservatives, and not a bad president for some liberals too. But
In terms of
the
character, but in terms of policies, no, he was a horrible president for
yes, that's probably
progressives
very
and
true.
liberals.
But in terms of how in terms he was pretty popular, and so people would kind of follow him, and taking a nod at how not okay domestic terrorism is, and how dangerous it might be, and shaming indirectly the former president Donald Trump is really pushing either pushing the party in the right direction or maybe even tearing it apart a bit from these far right conservatives, from these a bit more typically Bush followers. You could certainly separate them into Bush and Trump followers. What do you follow? Are you tearing the country apart or pushing it in the right direction? I mean, not the country, the party. Um, so it's really, especially we've been talking a lot on this channel about how the Republican Party is definitely changing, and seeing things like this, where Bush feels the need to take a jab at President Trump because of what he did on January 6th is very important to point out and realize.
Yeah, and I think we could talk about the transition between the Republican Party back in the year 2000 and 2001, basically, when George Bush was president during the event of 9/11, and today. But I think it's just important to realize that Bush has neck for mentioning this
Hmm.
because he is still part of the Republican Party, but he chose to go out of his way to take a jab at former President Trump. And for a former president attacking another former president of their same political party is it takes a lot for someone to do that. So I commemorate former President George W. Bush for going out of his way to do that while he was in the memorial that Trump did not attend. Yes, uh, Biden was the only president to attend the one in Pennsylvania. However, Trump just chose not to go to any of them. So I think
Hmm.
we're going to move on to our next point that we're going to be talking, and this is also our last point today. And we're going to be talking about a big, explosive new book that was released by two Washington Post authors. And this is going to be, we're going to be talking directly about General Milley. And now
Hmm.
when on my notes, I spelled Milley wrong, but whatever. So basically, what happened is General Milley,
Miley.
yeah, I said Miley. Okay, but General Milley, he called China to basically prevent a war from happening because he thought there was a threat of President Trump when he was still in office, right before the inauguration, to start a war with China. the prospect that we had a president in the White House where one of our top military the advisors to the president thought that he was unhinged and could possibly start a war with the second large or with the I mean in population the largest country in the world, in terms of military the largest amount of members in the military. And the fact that there was a prospect and a possibility of that happening where we are going to war with China,
Hmm.
many Republicans are very pissed at him for calling China because he thought it was a well, first of all, like Rand Paul wants him fired, Tom Cotton wants him fired, and many other big names in the GOP want him fired. But I think the
Hmm.
possibility of Trump doing something like that, the fact there was a possibility whatsoever, is kind of crazy to me. That we had a president in the White House that could have possibly started a war with China.
That is something to think about, especially in this modern age where it's confirmed that China has nuclear weapons and a population and economy rivaling ours is not population, at least population far exceeding, but an economy rivaling ours. It's something to worry about and not something to play around with, like what General Milley was doing here.
Well, I think he was calling, I think it was the ambassador, right, to China
Yep.
to ensure them that US was not going to be involved in a war with China. Had he not done
It's
that, I
sad
don't
that he
know.
had to do that,
It
though.
was
It's sad that he had to do that.
lots of Republicans, like I said, want him fired. However, whether or not you think he did the right thing, the fact that he thought that he had to do it anyways is crazy. If you are a member of the military that is high ranking in the White House, in close contact with the President of the United States, and you think they're unhinged and might start a war with another nation, then maybe you would do something like this. Maybe you would make a call to China to ensure them that we would not be going to war with them, regardless of the issue.
Hmm.
And I don't really have much to say on this because Trump only was in there for I don't actually know the date the phone call was. It was after Trump knew he was out of the White House on January 20th. But it's still Bill
It
Wildering to
is a
me. Yeah.
scary prospect.
So what do you think, Sam?
It's scary and sad that this stuff would actually have to go into play and be considered, and these line of events actually happened. Um, and it's a scare. And as I was saying earlier, it's a scary prospect that people are that people in the former White House and other agencies are fiddling with this stuff with especially these top military advisors and stuff like that. It's not. It's just weird that this is something that we have to be considering with that a possible war with China, which no be it how unlikely it may be, has people on the phone with the Chinese ambassador and all of this other juicy stuff, and it's very interesting to see why and how we got so close to the situation that we did, and it's really sets a precedent for what sets a precedent and a and other factors of what are we doing with our military, and especially a problem during the Cold War was the issue of who do we trust with this information, and it looks like we still have that issue today. Who do we trust with consulting other people and other stuff? It's really an issue that needs to be resolved.
Right, and I think we're gonna wrap up the episode. Yes, we could have gone a lot more detail on these things, but they're such massive topics, whether it's the
Mm.
call to China from General Milley
Yep.
or talking about the recall election and what that means for future elections for the Democrat and Republican parties. or what happened on 9/11 and really what it means that Trump didn't show up to any of these memorials. However, I think we're going to close it out. We've been going on for, I think, 25-ish minutes. So, anyways, thank you. Make sure to tune in next Tuesday for our next episode. And tune in then. Thank you for watching.